believe Nathan Palmer, you would have to believe that Jonah Levy somehow jumped over 4 or 5 other COs, curb stomped, to use Nathan Palmer's words, curb stomped Messiah Nantwey, then jumped backwards back out in the hallway to address the other people in the room or in the hall. It is unbelievable, folks. Your Honor, thank you. Mr. Fitzpatrick, Mr. Williams, Ms. Fitzpatrick. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Some of you may be wondering, as I am, just who was or who is on trial. We heard a lot of evidence and testimony last week about Caleb Blair, his boot mark on the head of Messiah Nantwey. We heard about Caleb Blair. We literally heard him screaming and raving after being bit. We heard about him potentially using some other force in the medical building. We heard about these plans, if you want to call them that, or talks about a shank that was allegedly recovered, or about what to do with the use of force. All of that came from Sergeant Frank Chandler. None of that had to do with Jonah Levy. Jonah Levy's boot was eliminated. You heard from Mr. Xerxes last week. His boot was eliminated as leaving that impression on Mr. Nantwey's forehead. He wasn't involved in any of this purported cover-up. All he did was show up last to that room at the 21-2 building, and according to Nicholas Mouzon, staying on his legs while everybody was in there fighting with Mr. Nantwey, trying to get him to simply handcuff and nip that situation in the bud. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your attention over the past week. There's been a lot of testimony, a lot of evidence. We've heard a lot of things. We've heard from several different witnesses. We heard about scientific evidence like DNA and blood. We've seen a number of body-worn camera, and I anticipate you'll see more, both from myself and from the prosecution. It can be a lot. I understand. And what I want to remind you folks is that when you do go to deliberate later on today, and the judge will remind you as well, you can have any testimony read back. You can watch any video you want. If you may have different recollections, you may need to look at things again, and that's okay. That means you're doing your job. That means you're deliberating. That means you're not just taking the prosecution at their word. And speaking of videos, I would encourage you to look at review the individual body-worn camera videos, not the ones that have the closed captioning or transcript on them, for lack of a better word. That's prosecution's evidence. You get to use your own eyes and ears. So during my closing, and the reason I bring up your ability to review any testimony, hear anything read back, is because I'm not going to go chapter and verse over every single witness and every single thing they said. I'm going to highlight the important points I would like you folks to focus on. And generally, my closing argument is going to discuss about 4 main areas. What we know about the case, what we heard from that witness stand, what we saw on those TV screens over the past week or so, what we know about the case, what the prosecution's theory is, what they set out for you at the very beginning, what the relevant law is. Judge Nolan's going to give you all the instructions you need in the world for the law, but there's going to be a few things I want to highlight for you, ladies and gentlemen. And lastly, I'm going to tell you how you can get to acquitting Jonah Levy, how he's innocent of these charges. So, one of the instructions that Judge Nolan's going to give you is that you take no adverse inference from the fact that Mr. Levy didn't take that witness stand. And also, as we all discussed at the beginning of this case during jury selection, the burden of proof never leaves the prosecution's table. It's their burden to call witnesses, their burden to prove their case to you. I have no burden to call any witnesses, even though I did call Mr. Savitsky as a witness on Friday. There's instructions the judge is going to give to you, but just in case you want to give that a little more thought, it is the prosecution's burden of proof, but the prosecution witnesses were defense witnesses. Nicholas Mouzon was a witness for Jonah Levy. Tristan Shepard was a witness for the defense. Adam Joseph, to an extent, was a witness for the defense. Sergei Savitsky, obviously the witness I called, was our witness. The body-worn camera in this case is evidence for the defense. The scene, Messiah Natwee's room, the scene itself is evidence for the defense. I already mentioned Caleb Blair's boot print. Jonah's boot is eliminated. That's all evidence for the defense. Mr. Natwee's injury, the injury that Dr. Monday agreed likely causes his death, that is evidence for the defense. And though you may not have heard Jonah Levy by taking that stand, you certainly heard his voice loud and clear throughout the body-worn camera. He was the voice of reason, the voice of doing what he was supposed to do. I got his legs. We all good. We okay here. Get back in your room. Let's also remember one thing, ladies and gentlemen. Prison's not a normal place. This incident did not take place at a library or a school. There were already heightened tensions with that strike going on. The prison was understaffed, as even Mr. Marticello acknowledged. Riots or incidents need to be taken care of right away before something more serious happens. And commands from both the National Guardsmen and the COs, they are not negotiable. They are not up for debate. So, talking about what happened, we'll call this the pre-backup time period. We heard from Nicholas Mouzon. Nicholas Mouzon said he observed Messiah Natwee smoking earlier in the day. I think we all can assume, ladies and gentlemen, based on the testimony we've heard, or he had a cigarette in his hand or some sort of smoking thing in his hand. I think we all can assume from the testimony we've heard about how drugs get into this prison and how Mr. Natwee was acting, he was smoking spike already. We heard that even before that backup call, he was already combative. He interfered with Nicholas Mouzon and Nicholas Mouzon trying to get meds to another incarcerated individual. Later on, he's refusing to get in line for count. Count is important. You heard from that from everybody. Count helps ensure the security and safety of every single person in that facility. And you heard from Nicholas Mouzon saying all this time, while Mr. Natwee is refusing, he's sneering, he's menacing, he's angry towards Nicholas Mouzon, saying, what if I don't? What if I don't get in count? What am I going to do? What are you going to do about it? So Messiah Natwee's day started on March 1st, 2025, antagonizing somebody serving our country, Nicholas Mouzon. And then what precipitated immediately the call for backup is he's waving a pencil around, holding it like a knife. As you heard from many people, Marticello, Mr. Backer, anything in prison can be a weapon. He's waving this around, pencil held like this. Nicholas Mouzon was with two other National Guardsmen at that point. They obviously felt threatened. This was a situation that could have got out of control really quick if they did not call for that backup. So backup is called. The CERT team, emergency response team. There's no dilly-dally, there's no discretion here. They got to go. They got to go. They don't know what they're getting into, but they do have to act quickly. And given that backup is not their normal lingo, they're not sure what they're getting into. They know it's bad, and they got to be there to take care of the potential worst case scenario before it happens. Remember, this was not a facility that we see on movies and TV where incarcerated individuals are behind bars. These are open air, open room. The incarcerated individuals are able to move freely about. It's a powder keg waiting to happen, given those circumstances, if any sort of threat is not taken care of right away. And make no mistake, Messiah Natwe was a threat at that point. So the CERT team gets there. We'll talk, what was Jonah doing? See in a moment. He was driving the van. He was last out of the van. Last up the stairs. He's walking the hallways. You can hear his voice plainly saying, "Are we good? We good?" Says, "I've got his legs." Again, I think we can all appreciate the fact that Mr. Natwe was not cooperative with Nathan Palmer, Joshua Bartler, any of the other 3 or 4 CERT team fellas that got in there before Mr. Levy. Mr. Levy is getting in there. We have a threat from a incarcerated individual. They're trying to get him out of there. All Mr. Levy does, according to Mr. Mouzon, is stand on his legs. And that helped that process of removing him from that room. And remember, Mr. Mouzon does describe Jonah Levy. Ball cap, tall, reddish brown beard. You see that right on the body-worn camera, folks. And what else did Mr. Mouzon say? That tall, reddish brown beard, ball cap guy, Jonah Levy, stayed right at his legs. He didn't go jumping over 4 or 5 other mountainous men and then jump back into the hallway. Said he stayed right there. Matter of fact, Nicholas Mouzon said he didn't see anybody kick Mr. Natwe in the head in that room. And again, this is all corroborated. Jonah's actions and what he did, the innocent nature of it, is all corroborated by the body-worn camera. Bear with us 1 second, folks. We're going to fast forward to right about the 11-minute mark. This is the body-worn camera of Sergeant Eifert. Sergeant Eifert wasn't moving too quick. We'll fast forward a second. So we can see from that vantage point, ladies and gentlemen, all the other COs, which to his limited credit, Nathan Palmer described as entering this room, and we hear Jonah Levy saying, we good, trying to get a handle on things. Right now, the other IIs are not coming out of the rooms, but something is starting to brew. Mr. Levy is simply saying, are we good? Again, putting handcuffs on is non-negotiable for Mr. Natwey in this situation. Got his legs.
Spread out, please. Get in the room. Get
Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to pay attention also. We hear voices. We've heard Jonah's voice. Jonah's voice being the voice of reason. We hear other people who are obviously losing their cool and becoming upset with Mr. Natwey. I'll defer to you whether they were justified in being upset with him, but listen to the voices. We're going to talk about shared intent in a little bit. So right there, we just heard Jonah Levy's voice. There's struggle is still going on in the room, plainly. But Jonah is obviously, I think you can reasonably infer, is out in the hallway saying, boys, get in your rooms, get in your rooms. In the hallway, not in the room, jumping over other large individuals and then jumping backwards so he can kick the head of Mr. Natwey. He's in the hallway. Next, I'm going to show you the body-worn camera of Officer Backer. I'll say no.
What you got? Who's that? What's up? What are you doing? Come here. Come here.
So right there, folks, we obviously see, and again, you guys can watch these videos in their entirety. We see Nathan Palmer was the first one to go into that room, followed by 3 or 4 other COs or CERT team members. It's Nathan Palmer. Now, prison isn't a nice place, we get that, and COs don't exactly have to ask politely, but it's Nathan Palmer who's the initial interaction with Messiah Natway, followed by 3 or 4 other of his CERT team members. And we just saw a moment ago and heard, that's Jonah Levy with that baseball cap, reddish brown beard, that Nicholas Mouzon identified as only being on Messiah Natway's legs. And it may come up, and if you listen clearly or closely during your deliberations, I think you can hear some of the National Guardsmen say POI, or whatever the phrase is, pointing at Mr. Natway. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to show this. This is from the body-worn camera of Frank Jacobs. And this is going to be a quick clip, folks, showing the van pulling up, Jonah Levy driving, and again, being the last to get out of the van. And folks, all we hear, recall Nicholas Mouzon's testimony as well, because the prosecution is going to try to argue to you that Messiah Natway was somehow docile and not cooperative, but not putting up a fight. We hear him fighting. We hear him screaming, "I'm not going to cuff up." We hear him growling, not gurgling or not some other lifeless. We hear him growling, is what Nicholas Mouzon said, indicative of somebody who is angry, who is under the influence of something, again, likely Spike. It's from, there we go. So from here, we know that eventually Mr. Natway is secured and is removed from that house, the room. Jonah, Caleb Blair, and others bring Mr. Natway to the medical building across the street. And again, keeping in mind, what is the trial of Jonah Levy? What is Jonah Levy doing? He's carrying him out. Mr. Natway is cuffed up front because he was, as you heard, he was refusing to handcuff. That was the only way they could get him out of that room. They follow procedure. They bring him over to the holding pen, at the medical building. You heard Mr. Levy say, okay, 1, 2, 3, let's roll him over by the book, following the rules, cool, calm, and collected. And we heard from Madam Joseph say that Jonah Levy was trying to calm Caleb Blair down when they got to the medical building. Jonah is there making sure everyone is okay. And again, the prosecution's theory is going to be that Messiah Natway was essentially already dead or getting close when he got to the medical infirmary building, or had somehow lost consciousness. That's not the case. We heard from Sergei Savitsky on Friday. He says when he was about to try to do his thing to try to get Mr. Natway's vitals and take care of him, Natway was flipping him off, smiling. He tried to treat him in the triage room. Natway was trying to bite Sergei Savitsky. We know that he'd already bitten Caleb Blair and bitten Tomasek and tried to bite other COs or CERT members in the room. He's not stopping. He's going to try and bite the nurse too. Being combative, refusing to let Sergei Savitsky take his vitals. And the prosecution did try to discredit Sergei a little bit on Friday based on the times of his reports versus the times that are on the Axon body camera. Ladies and gentlemen, come on. He said he was going off the clocks that are in that room, that are in that building. He didn't have an Axon body camera floating around. His time was accurate. Sergei Sabitsky, he also asked, the prosecution tried to get him to acknowledge that he had some sort of relationship with the COs that are there. He said, no, I don't even know him. I have minimal contact. They tell me what's going on. I take care of the incarcerated individual. They move on. Sergei Sabitsky has no motivation, no reason to stretch the truth, lie or otherwise, for you ladies and gentlemen. He was just a registered nurse doing his job, trying to take care of a combative, volatile, and violent incarcerated individual. Speaking of that triage room, this is important. We heard from Tristan Shepard, who again, doesn't really have any dog in this fight. He's not facing any sort of prosecution. He's not facing any sort of prison time. He says he sees Nantwey thrown to the ground, hard cement floor, directly hitting his head in that triage room. He thinks it was Berger, Bartlett, and a blue shirt CO. That blue shirt CO was Nathan Palmer. And again, this triage room, I submit to you folks, is where Messiah Nantwey's death was caused. I just mentioned a moment ago, he was still combative, still biting, thrown violently to the floor, head hitting the pavement. The calls for the nurse or the triage or the Narcan come about 25 minutes or so after Jonah Levy brings him into the medical room, and about 15 minutes or so after he's seen in triage. 10 to 15 minutes. Again, the timeline of events is a determination for you folks. But the important thing about that triage room, according to Tristan Shepard, and again, where Messiah Nantwey is violently thrown on his head, I asked him point blank, was Jonah Levy in that room? No. No, he was not. Jonah Levy had nothing to do with Messiah Nantwey being thrown on his head on that pavement floor. He wasn't in that room. That was all on the COs or CERT team members that were in that room. So what caused Messiah Nantwey's death? We heard a lot of testimony from Dr. Monday on Friday. She acknowledged, and the prosecution has made a big deal, there were 69 some odd injuries all over Messiah Nantwey. Most of those injuries, if not all, with the exception of limited on the left side of his brain, most of those injuries did not contribute to his death. Most of those injuries were not serious physical injuries. He did not die because he had some abrasions from handcuffs or shackles. He did not die because he had a bloody nose or a bloody lip or a bloody chin. He did not die because he had some injuries or some abrasions on his scalp. Nobody's disputing that Mr. Nantwey was a recipient of some blows or some physical force. But what is clear, what you folks have to recognize in order to deliberate, is what ultimately caused his death. Dr. Monday acknowledged on the right side of his head, we saw those pictures, he had the abrasion, contusion on his temple, on the right side of his head, but there was no hemorrhaging, the uncle herniation, which is a very, very serious brain injury that Dr. Monday acknowledged. Nothing, no brain injury on the right side of his head. The left side is where the subdural hematoma had. The uncle herniation, the hemorrhaging. Dr. Monday acknowledged that left side of his brain is likely what caused his death. But there was no contusion, no abrasion, no other indication he was struck on that head, on that left side of the head. Nothing that looked like a boot or a kick to that side of the head. No skull fracture on that side of the head. Now, I asked Dr. Monday about the contra coup injury, which is, and she disagreed with me, but the contra coup injury is when your head rapidly accelerates and comes in contact with a hard surface. You will see surface level skin injuries like bruises, abrasions on one side, but no corresponding brain injury. The brain injury happens on the other side. I'm not a doctor. I can't explain why that happens, only that it does. And this explanation, this makes the most sense for how those injuries occurred from Messiah Natwe. Dr. Monday agreed with me up until she couldn't. Dr. Monday agreed with me on the injuries and what causes death. She agreed with me up until she couldn't. I will submit to you, she recognized that that type of injury would not be consistent with the prosecution's theory. But how else would it have happened? There's no bruising, no kicking, no boot mark to that side of the temple. How else would it have happened, ladies and gentlemen? So, speaking of that, prosecution's theory is this, is that Jonah Levy kicked Messiah Natwe in the head in the room of building 21-2. This is the prosecution's theory. We heard that from two different witnesses. We heard it from Michael Moon, who's serving a 20-year sentence for multiple armed robberies. A 20-year sentence for going to different locations, sticking a gun in a cashier or a clerk's face and robbing them. 20-year sentence for a violent man. And just in case you think he's something more than violent, he is. He's also a fraud. He was convicted that same year, a different date. Apparently Michael Moon picks dates to be a fraud and different dates to be a violent felon, but criminal impersonation, benefiting himself while committing fraud against another. And we heard that he was asking for money in connection with his testimony here and better housing. And he is up for parole in 3 years. He wants to go home in 3 years. Now, I asked him if he expects a letter from the prosecution helping out. He said no, but again, you can take a fraud or violent felon at his word if you want. I suggest that you do not. And once in this story about his son receiving treatment, I'm glad that Michael Moon's son is purportedly doing better. But I take offense to it when he says it in this court for the simple purpose of trying to get sympathy from the jury. After all, he did not say anything about that to the judge or his counsel or the prosecution at the time he pled back in 2012. He didn't say anything then, so I don't want you to give any weight to it now, to the extent that you would believe a word out of his mouth. And again, even with all of that, all of those reasons you should not believe a word out of his mouth, the evidence, the facts of this case also contradict everything. I'm going to show you in a minute the photo of him. Unless he has eyes on the back of his head, he could not have seen what he said he saw, to you, ladies and gentlemen. All the action was behind him. He had another CO that was standing right behind him to secure. There is no way he saw what he saw, and even what he said is not consistent with anything else. He said Messiah Natwe's head was facing out the door towards the hallway. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. His legs were towards the doorway. His head was towards the window side of that wall. He also said to you, ladies and gentlemen, he was knocked out, never said anything again after a certain point. We heard him growling. We heard Messiah Natwe screaming. Ladies and gentlemen, this is one of the people. There's two people the prosecution based their case on. Messiah Natwe is one of them. I'm sorry, Michael Moon is one of them. He is unbelievable. And then, speaking of unbelievable, Nathan Palmer. That young man has quite a bit of a motivation to testify according to the prosecution theory. We heard about his young family, and I'm happy for him for that. But he does not want to go to prison. You heard his testimony. He's expecting to hopefully avoid prison by virtue of his testimony for you folks. He has all the motivation in the world to testify according to the prosecution theory. He was wearing, and also it's important, he was wearing a blue shirt that day, as we just saw on Sergeant Backer's or Officer Backer's body-worn camera. That's an important distinction because remember, Tristan Shepard said, yeah, it was a guy wearing a blue shirt who was in the room when Nathan was thrown on his head in the ER. Nathan Palmer was also present for 2 different instances where he was slammed on the head, where Mr. Natwee was slammed on his head. Nathan Palmer said that after Natwee attacked he and Joshua Bartlett, there was wrestling, other guys get in there, and he wrestles him to the ground from the bed to the floor, again falling on his head. And again, Nathan Palmer was first. So that's 2 different instances in which Nathan Palmer was directly involved with Messiah Natwee falling with force on his head. He was first in the room with Bartlett and 3 or 4 other guys. He has every reason in the world to testify according to prosecution theory in order to save himself. And conveniently, damnedest thing, he denies seeing any sort of use of force in the triage room or the medical building. Denies seeing anything that is right where he was. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think this is I'm showing you a still image which is taken from one of the body-worn cameras. Speaking of Michael Moon first, I think as I pointed out a moment ago, if you look on the right side, that's where he was, or says he was, facing the wall with a CO behind him. Obviously, the room looks a little bit roughed up a little bit. He acknowledges being him. There's no way he grew eyes in the back of the head on top of being a violent felon, an armed robber, and a fraud. He could not see what he said he saw. And this is also a perfect thing for you to demonstrate the sheer unbelievability of Nathan Palmer's story. Do you mean to tell me that Nathan Palmer, you saw him walk in here, a large individual, Joshua Bartlett, we did not hear from, also in this room with those 2 beds, 3 other COs or CERT team members come in, all testified to by Palmer, he acknowledged this. It's an 8-foot wide room that's already made smaller by these beds, by this foot locker, by that foot locker. So in order to believe Nathan Palmer, you would have to believe that Jonah Levy somehow jumped over 4 or 5 other COs, curb stomped, to use Nathan Palmer's words, curb stomped Messiah Natwee, then jumped backwards back out in the hallway to address the other people in the room or in the hall. It is unbelievable, folks. I would say it's pretty well impossible for Jonah Levy had to have done that. The space would not allow for it. The height of the other men would not allow for it. Where Mr. Palmer said they had Mr. Natwee would not allow for it. There's no way it happened, jumping over and jumping backwards. Some sort of freakish athletic event that most people walking this earth are not capable of. And again, remember what Tristan Shepard said about Nathan Palmer. CERT members at that triage room, Bartlett and a regular CO, Natwee thrown, hitting his head directly on the cement floor. The regular CO was likely Nathan Palmer, and Jonah Levy was not in that room, not in that triage room at that time. And folks, let's also use a bit of common sense as well. Let's just, setting aside the lack of any sort of credibility that Michael Moon or Nathan Palmer have. If Jonah had actually kicked Messiah Natwee in that room, we would have heard it on the body-worn camera. Somebody would have said something that would have been captured on the body-worn camera, either during that room interaction or in the triage or in the medical room. Somebody would have said, Jonah, what are you doing? Stop it. These guys have no filter. This is all these COs. You hear all these comments they're making. We heard that Adam Joseph talk about them getting into a fight over a vehicle or an argument over a vehicle earlier in the day. What the F are you doing? We hear about these other arguments that they have. This is not a prison is not an environment where people hold back their thoughts. If Jonah had in fact kicked Messiah Natwe in the way that the prosecution alleges, we would have heard about it. Something would have been said about it. It would have happened on body-worn camera. It did not, it was not, because Jonah Levy did not kick Messiah Natwe in the head. Further, we heard from Investigator Tabor. Dozens of interviews were conducted. Dozens. From people that were in the room at Building 121-2. People who were with Jonah Levy that day. We heard from dozens, there was numerous reports from National Guard people who were there. Nathan Palmer is the only one who saw that happen. Nathan Palmer is the only one.
Judge, I object to that. That's speculating as to what the testimony would be of these other men. The jury has not heard from them.
Disregard that comment. It is your memory that's controlling you. You're not to speculate with what anybody may have said had they been called to witness.
Thank you, Judge. We heard from all these interviews. You can use your common sense, folks. So who are you going to believe? Who are we going to believe, ladies and gentlemen, about what happened in that room? You're going to believe Nicholas Mouzon, serving our country for the National Guard, called into duty in a difficult circumstance that he's not trained for, no dog in the fight whatsoever, no reason for any testimony to lie, to cover for anybody. You're going to believe him? You're going to believe Treston Shepard? No worry about a criminal conviction, no worry about going to prison. Testified, looked directly at you folks. These guys are just calling balls and strikes. They told you what they saw. Adam Joseph, we heard from, testified, I saw Jonah calming Caleb Blair down. You're going to believe the scene itself, what I just showed you, the impossibility of what Nathan Palmer is trying to sell to you folks. I submit you believe these credible witnesses, or you believe Nathan Palmer and Michael Moon. Does that get you to beyond all reasonable doubt for a conviction on any offense? Who are you going to believe, folks? There's credible witnesses and there's incredible witnesses. And folks, as I start out here, at some points it did not seem that this was a trial about Jonah Levy. We heard about Caleb Blair, the boot print, him getting bit, punching in the holding pen, extremely agitated. Caleb Blair had his own day. Heard about Frank Chandler, the sergeant. He's the one who allegedly was ordering people on their use of force and what to do with this shank. There's no evidence that Jonah had anything to do with any of those conversations. There's no evidence whatsoever that Jonah even heard anything or acquiesced or acknowledged anything. Matter of fact, he filled out his use of force form separate from everybody else. And again, Jonah's boot was eliminated as leaving that print on Messiah Natwe's forehead. This was not a trial about Jonah Levy, folks. Don't let the prosecution spin things, ladies and gentlemen. Don't let them spin things into evidence of guilt that are not. I'm not quite sure. Mr. Fitzpatrick gets the last word today, so I'm not quite sure what he's going to get to say. I don't get to stand up again and argue to you folks in rebuttal. That's just the way the rules are. But don't let them spin some unrelated comments or a fist bump as somehow evidence of guilt. Don't let them spin out of context comments by Nathan Palmer when he purportedly said to Jonah, "What the F?" There's no context or some sort of conversation that Jonah and Caleb Blair had where Caleb is alleged to have said, "I got kids. Well, maybe he didn't want to get bit. Maybe it was a tough job. Strikes going on. There's 100 different reasons for Caleb Blair to say those things. Don't let them spin them. Don't let them spin this Raspberries breakfast meeting either. We didn't hear any testimony about this, how this Raspberries meeting or breakfast was anything other than a group of guys getting together for breakfast the morning after a very traumatic event. Obviously, nobody's happy that Mr. Natwee passed away and that his family has the most trauma to deal with. But these guys are not used to people dying either. It was upsetting to them, of course. It is a natural human reaction to say, hey guys, let's get together. Make sure everybody's doing okay. Don't let the Raspberries thing spin into anything else other than that. Blood on the boots. Jonah was carrying him. He was bleeding from the lip. He was bleeding from the chin. We heard beside now screaming, growling. It's a pretty reasonable explanation for how blood could get on his boot, especially if his head is close to by where Mr. Natwee is. And we heard that Jonah was also, when they got to the holding pen, Jonah saying, okay, 1, 2, 3, roll over. He was in close contact with where Mr. Natwee could have been bleeding from, and he could have stepped in blood. And again, there's no other indication that blood is not from anywhere on Mr. Natwee's head that would have been kicked according to the prosecution's theory. So again, don't let the prosecution spin that fact into evidence of guilt either. And the fact that I think they're going to draw upon the fact that it is not really a good look the way Mr. Natwee is being brought into the medical building with handcuffs up this way and 2 other guys carrying his legs. Well, Mr. Natwee was refusing to cuff up, as I mentioned a little while ago. He was combative. The situation was getting hostile. As we heard from Mr. Shepard, they had to get out of there soon. They had to get out of there quickly. And given Mr. Natwee's refusal to be cooperative, they had to do what they had to do, and handcuffing him this way with his hands up front, what they had to do. And as I mentioned a moment ago, also with this discussion of use of force paperwork as well as the shank, there's no evidence before you folks that Mr. Levy had anything to do with any of that. The prosecution has made a big deal out about the fact that Mr. Levy's name is not on use of force for other people. Look at those use of force. Look at it. Mr. Levy, in fact, did complete a use of force that is consistent with what we see on the body-worn camera. And maybe, perhaps it's not the use of force because nobody else's use of force because nobody else saw him do anything. Maybe he didn't use force. Maybe he didn't do that. Prosecution wants to make you think that there's some big, gigantic cover-up. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not. Let's talk a little bit about the law. The top count against Mr. Levy is depraved indifference murder. Judge Nolan's going to give you full jury instructions in a little bit. But I'll skip to the second paragraph there. In order to find Mr. Levy guilty of depraved indifference murder, you have to find that he is depravedly indifferent, not just willing to take a grossly unreasonable risk to human life. The person does not care how the risk turns out. What evidence is there at all of depravity on the part of Mr. Levy? What evidence is there at all that he did not care, that he engaged in a risk that was reckless, that he did not care whether Mr. Natwee was going to live and die? There is no evidence of that, not even a little bit. Manslaughter first degree. There's the other count, very serious count against Mr. Levy. Person's guilty of manslaughter in the first degree when, with the intent to cause serious physical injury to another person, he or she causes the death of such person or a third person. The definition of serious physical injury is very important here, folks. Serious physical injury means impairment of a person's physical condition which creates a substantial risk of death or which causes death or serious and protracted disfigurement, protracted impairment of health, or protracted loss or impairment of the function of any bodily organ. nearly all of the injuries on Mr. Natwe were simple injuries. They were not serious physical injuries. Dr. Monday acknowledged that. The only serious physical injury was what happened to his brain on the left side. Gang assault, first and second degree. It's two different definitions. They're fairly self-explanatory. The judge will read them to you in full. And what I would submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, is I think you have to break this down when you're deliberating with respect to gang assault. Gang assault is essentially a group of people assaulting somebody, one person, with the intent to cause, either the intent to cause physical injury or the intent to cause serious physical injury. I need you folks, when you deliberate, to break this down. And I'll explain why in a minute. There's the incident that happened in the room, and there's the incident that happened in the triage room. The room at 21-2 and the triage room. Those are two separate incidences for you folks to consider. An accessorial liability. Criminal liability for the conduct of another. The judge is going to read you the definition in full. But basically, you have to find, when it comes to, if you are deliberating this account, you have to find that Jonah Levy was acting with the same intent as the other people in the room, or in the, well, he wasn't in the triage room. We have to find that he had the same intent. There's no evidence that he had the same intent. Mere presence at a scene is not enough. He's also charged with conspiracy in the 5th degree and offering a false instrument for filing. The judge will give you further instructions on those. The judge is also going to give you charges on justification. Justification is more commonly known as self-defense or defense of another. And this you got to keep in mind, and I mentioned a moment ago, the two different areas where an altercation occurred. Natwe's actions in the room, what we talked about, violent, combative, biting. He's high on spike. He's not cuffing up. He's screaming. Any use of force, and Jonah is last to that room. Any use of force in that room likely happened either before or out of reach of Mr. Levy and has nothing to do with him. But as respects Jonah, if you are going to consider, and you can certainly determine, make your own determination, if you think that he somehow shared the same intent with anybody in that building, in building 21-2 in Messiah Natwe's room, this is where the justification will come in for your folks' consideration. Any use of force in that room, I would submit, was justified based on Mr. Natwe's actions, attacking Palmer, attacking Bartlett, biting. Any use of force in that room was justified. However, it's a nuance here. I don't think that Mr. Levy shared the same intent if, in fact, Mr. Natwe was slammed on his head in that room. And of course, Mr. Levy was nowhere near the triage room where Mr. Natwe's death was ultimately caused by being slammed on his head by CO's not named Jonah Levy. So let's talk about how you can get to acquitting Jonah Levy based on his innocence. Standing on Mr. Natwe's legs is not depraved indifference or intent to cause serious physical injury. And if you want to follow what Mr. Muzan said, using a few baton strikes to get compliance on his lower body, baton strikes on Mr. Natwe's lower legs, even if true, is not evidence of a depraved indifference or is it intent to cause serious physical injury. Carrying Mr. Natwe to the 21-2 building to the medical room and into the holding cell is not a depraved indifference to life or the intent to cause serious physical injury. That's all Jonah Levy did, folks. That's all he did. Shared intent. Again, this is not the bank robber scenario that the prosecution wants you to think it is. They're going to with the unknown. All they know is something bad is happening. And they want to make sure it doesn't get any worse. But shared intent, Jonah drove the van. He was last in the room. Palmer was first in the room. He and Bartlett were the first to engage. Jonah just helped in securing his legs and then doing crowd control in the hallway. It was plainly Blair who was agitated. It's Blair's boot print, after all. We heard Blair screaming, play stupid games, win stupid prizes, or something to that effect. And we know that Jonah Levy, when they got to the medical building, Caleb, calm down, man. Calm down. It's Caleb saying, hey, we good? We okay? Everybody all right? Where is the shared intent to cause serious physical injury? There is none. And again, I can't reiterate to you folks enough. The serious physical injury causing Mr. Natwee's death, I submit to you, happened in that triage room. Jonah was not in that triage room at that time. He could not possibly have had the same intent. Perhaps the most significant jury instruction you're going to hear, ladies and gentlemen, is beyond a reasonable doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt is proof of guilt. Beyond a reasonable doubt is proof that leaves you so firmly convinced of the defendant's guilt, you have no reasonable doubt of the existence of any element of the crime or of the defendant's identity as the person who committed this crime. Ladies and gentlemen, there should be no doubt in your mind of Mr. Levy's innocence. There should be no doubt. But just in case you have a few, how this death happened, there's reasonable doubt. Do I believe Nathan Palmer? You shouldn't, but there's reasonable doubt. Do I believe Michael Moon? Again, you shouldn't, but his conflicting story with Nicholas Mouzon. There's a reasonable doubt, folks. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not lost on me, nor is it lost on Mr. Levy, that we are dealing with a tragic situation. Whatever reason got Mr. Natwee into prison, we all agree that he shouldn't have met an untimely death. And our heart does break for the family of Mr. Natwee. He was a 22-year-old kid, after all, a troubled 22-year-old kid, obviously. And this is a tragic situation. Nobody disputes that. But ladies and gentlemen, we do not double down on tragedy in courts of law. We do not double down and convict somebody of these allegations, and convict somebody of these crimes without any evidence. There is no evidence, no credible evidence anyway, that Mr. Levy participated in anything that caused Messiah Natwee's death. There's no evidence of it because he did not do anything to contribute to Messiah Natwee's death. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said at the beginning, all the evidence you heard from, there was defense witnesses, defense evidence. Nicholas Mouzon, Tristan Shepard. We heard Jonah Levy's voice, the voice of reason. The prosecution is going to get up here in a little bit and try to convince you to convict him. But folks, I need you to use your own eyes and ears, your own common sense about this situation. I need you to judge credibility appropriately and look at this evidence and analyze it and deliberate. And I know, folks, that after you have done all that and carried out your duty as jurors, you'll return the only verdict that makes sense. That's not guilty on all counts, folks. Thank you very much.
Please like the video, share the video, comment below on the video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also, click on the bell notification icon and select all so that you will be notified when I go live.